Hi all, my name is Dhruv Sharma, and in this session, we will discuss about setting up Cisco WSA 9.2 version in proxy mode with explicit configuration and transparent. I highly recommend you all to first understand about what is proxy and what is difference between an explicit proxy and a transparent proxy before we dive into the session. So in this session, we will be looking at into very basic steps and configuration, how we can configure a WSA in a transparent and an explicit mode. But before that, if you want to understand how to build your WSA from scratch, I've covered each and every step in this in the slide link below. So this is a link of the slide, which is there in the description as well as in this PPT. So I highly recommend you all to go through it where we have captured each and every step how you can configure WSA from scratch, where we have explained the type of interfaces you require and the link from where you can download a virtual image and initial all the steps. Each and every steps we have clearly shown in the slides. So for the sake of this lab, we are using a very simple topology where a user is trying to access WSA. Where the user is trying to access the websites through WSA, which is a proxy. The user's IP address is 192.168.111.20, and the WSA IP is 111.150, and the default gateway is 111.100. Pretty simple Class C subnet topology, 192.168.111. And we have a ISP which is hosting two websites, one websites with both HTTP and HTTPS. That's 10.10.10.1111. In the first section of this session, we're going to set up the proxy in basically a transparent mode. So when I say a transparent mode, the end users, which is 111.111.20, will be accessing the websites as if and he will be totally kept unaware that the proxies will be there to inspect any traffic. So the proxy, which is 192.168.111.150, will be completely left unaware. The users will be accessing the websites as if without a proxy. So, but the router will be receiving the traffic and will be sending the traffic back to the WSA for inspection, and the traffic will be sent back by the WSA back to the router to access the destination. So in this, what we mean that before the proxy, the ISP router should see the user's IP address that is 192.168.111.20 accessing it. But after we bring WSA into the picture, the ISP should see 192.168.111.150 accessing the destination on behalf of the user. That's why the concept of proxy is in place. As I mentioned, the prerequisite, the user should be able to access these destinations. And if I bring the user, so this is the jump server. And if I bring the end user, this is the user that has an IP address of 192.168.111.20. And if I verify, the user is able to access the destination without any proxy. That has a default gateway of 192.168.111.100, which is nothing but the edge router. If I take you back to the ISP, we can see that the user is trying to access the destination. The stage is perfectly set and we should crack on. So the first thing first, we can configure the proxy setup in a transparent mode in two ways, an option 1 and option number 2. In option number 1, we will configure an access control policy on the edge router, which is the default gateway, which has a responsibility to receive the traffic, which is a default gateway, which is responsible to receive the traffic from the user and send back to the WSA. And the WSA post inspection will send traffic back to the router. So this redirection will happen because of an access control policy on the router. And this exchange of packets between the router and the WSA is being carried out using a Cisco proprietary protocol, which is known as WCCP, Web Cache Communication Protocol. So as you can see on the edge router, which is an R1 in our case, is been configured with an access control policy to allow the complete subnet, which is 192.168.11.0, which is nothing but the class C subnet for HTTP and HTTPS. We have created a separate ACL to allow proxy, which is .150, where we do not want router to redirect the traffic. So what I mean, when any user from this network 192.168.11.0 try to access the router, the traffic should be redirected back to WSA. Instead, when WSA is trying to access any destination, that traffic should not be redirected. So that exception for WSA is achieved by a separate ACL. And we call both ACLs into WCCP configuration. We give an entry of 90 and call it within this area. And we go back on the external interface, which is in our case is gig 02. Go back, which has an IP address of 111.100, as we all know. And we go there and call this number over here. Not really a very complex configuration. However, Cisco also gives us a second option where we don't want to configure two ACLs. We want to make it very clean and neat. So we also have a second option where we configure an ACL, just one single ACL. We ask Cisco router to redirect all the traffic to WSA with a permit tag, but deny the redirection if a traffic is coming from WSA. So the traffic is coming from WSA with an IP 111.150. That traffic should not be redirected. And again, you call this access control policy into WCCP configuration, and the WCP is called back into the interface configuration. And yes, we can do the verification, show WCCP. And after that, a very simple configuration on the WSA, very basic configuration, two-step process where you have to log in on the WSA, go under the network section and click edit. And you have to provide the WCCP number, the same number, what we have given in back at the access control policy 90, and provide the port numbers 80 and 443, where you want proxy to intercept the traffic, and a security key number. So if you remember in the last slide, we provided a password, a Cisco. Similar configuration, we have to do it on the proxy where we have provided the credentials. I've given Cisco, you could have given any password. And once the configuration has been pushed on the WSA, the status and the router ID is all set. Simple, isn't it? Now, when the user is trying to access the destination using, but now the ISP is recording the IP address of not of the end user, but of the proxy server. Before we kick on with the transparent proxy, let's quickly jump in the lab and let's configure the setting. It will be fun. I will bring back my topology. Remove the slides. Take you back to the user. First, taking back to the default gateway, which is an R1. So WCCP is not yet enabled. It's a bare configuration. If I go back on my WCCP, transparent redirection, oops, let me log in. As you can see, I have done some basic configuration of WSA, nothing nothing great. So I have given a dynamic service ID, which is 90. You could have given anything out of one from 255 and a port number 80 and 443. You could have added 21 as well if you are intercepting a FTP traffic. You also have to provide a router IP with which WCCP we're going to form a tunnel. In our case, it's the default gateway that is 111.100. And finally, the password. In my case, it was Cisco. I then submit changes. Not really a great deal of configuration, guys. It's a very simple configuration, and we so I didn't thought of deleting it and recreating it. So it's very simple configuration, and the configuration details are also mentioned in the slides. So now going back to the router. So now we have to configure an access control policy. So I will quickly configure an access control policy, IP access control policy, extended redirect, enter permit, permit TCP 192.168.1111.0 dot. Okay, sorry. So right now we are going with option number 1, where we're going to create 2 access control policy. We are specifying that using this access control policy, which is a redirect, all the traffic from this subnet 111.0 for ATN 443 will be redirected. And now we have to create a new access control policy. I will call it as WSA permit IP host 192.168.111.150 any. So I use this access control policy to specify that traffic from this host should not be redirected. If I take you back to the topology, the subnet is 192.168.111.0, where I specify that traffic should be redirected, but with WSA, the traffic should not be redirected. And I have to call this both access control policy in WCCP configuration, which is IPWCCP, and I will give it as a 90 because if you see under the proxy configuration, I've given a 90 service ID. So the configuration should match. Should redirect list. I will copy the name, paste, and group list is WSA password Cisco. So I've done the configuration, but the configuration, this WCCP setting should be applied on the interface. So if we go back to the topology, this router external facing interface is gig2 interface gig2. I will go IPWCCP 90, which is over here, space, redirect in. Job done. That's it. So it's as simple as that. So we are the configuration for WCCP transparent is done. If I do show access control, show first, let's check the WCCP parameter. Yeah, it looks very neat to me, where the router ID has been given, which is the default gateway IP address facing the LAN. If I go back to show access control policy, this is the access control list. Now, if I go back on the client PC, I can show that the users are not configured with any explicit configuration of the proxy, blank, and the default gateway is just pointing towards the router R1. Sorry, yeah. Topology is very flat network. It's a very flat network, 192.168.11.100, which is very simple. The user is pointing towards the default gateway. If I now go back on the ISP, right now we can see that every time it's just the user is trying to access the web server, but now I will do a refresh. The IP address on the ISP must change. See, it's 150, which is nothing but the proxy server. Isn't it very simple? This is the bare minimum configuration where we have achieved user is sending traffic to the default gateway, and transparently the traffic is being sent to WCCP and back to the to WSA, and WSA using WCCP send it back to the default gateway, then to the internet. If we do show WCCP configuration, we can see total number of packets which are directed is 8. If I do show access list, we can see that there is a match. Now coming back to the slides for the last section of the presentation, we will be configuring the WSA in explicit mode. The proxies WSA by default has been configured to support proxy functionality in explicit mode. If I go back to the WSA web proxy, we can see that the proxy is automatically configured to intercept the traffic on port 80 and 3128. So without any configuration, so I haven't performed any changes. These are device default settings. So unlike blue code proxies where it is basically configured to intercept a traffic on port 8080, but WSA has been configured to intercept a traffic on port 3128. So I won't perform any further changes. These are the default changes of when the proxy was configured from its default parameters. So I will use the same configuration, but we have to configure again the edge routers where the edge routers, oops, where is it? Yeah. So first we have to perform a couple of changes. First, we have to create an access control policy. We call it as an ACL as a proxy, where we have to permit all the traffic from, oops, let me bring up the pen. So in this ACL, we have to basically allow all the traffic from the proxy server, which is IP 1111.50, and deny all the traffic from rest of the users for port 80 and 443. This is not a mandatory step, but it is based on the best practice. The reason why I'm saying it is because what if a smart user which has admin privileges remove the proxy from his browser where we explicitly define it and try to send the traffic directly from the default gateway? And since WCCP is not in place where it in transparent mode, the router was configured to divert the traffic back to the WSA using WCCP, that is a transparent mode configuration. But now we are working on explicit mode, where the users will be configured on their browser to point it to WSA. What I mean is this. We're going to go back on the user's laptop, go back to tools, internet options, connections, LAN settings, enable. So what is happening? The users are being configured with the proxy server IP address and with a port 3128, which is there by default. I haven't changed any setting on the WSA, guys. Very basic configuration. And I click OK. Now, what's happening is the users is supposed to reach traffic via WSA. But what if a smart user thinks that why should I he check his setting from the browser, any IT aware guy can see it, and he's not able to access some gambling websites or restricted websites. So he tried to remove the setting from the browser and then try to send the traffic using default gateway. And if in case you don't have an access control policy to stop that behavior, the users can easily bypass the proxy. So I'm going to create an access control policy on the default gateway to allow to disallow any traffic coming from the corporate LAN for HTTP and HTTPS, and permit traffic only from the proxy's IP address, and apply this ACL back on the interface. Simple, isn't it? And then default configuration, no change. Ensure that clients are configured with the proxy IP address. Lab 1. So the user part is done. I'm going to just go back on the default gateway. I'm going to get rid of interface WCCP configuration, because now we are demonstrating Explicit proxy, which doesn't use WCCP, and create an IP access control list. Okay, and we call it as proxy. Extended maybe, yeah. Proxy. In this case, I'm going to permit IP anything from proxy because I trust my proxy 168.111.150 and destination is any. So I expect proxy is genuine and anything, any traffic which is initiated from the proxy should be allowed. But traffic should not be allowed from 168. Oops. From the corporate LAN. And 443. So what we have done, so we ensured that anyone from the corporate LAN cannot access any website with ATN 443. If they try to access it, they will not receive any web page, but if they access it via proxy, only then they can reach to the destination. But we have to assign this this access control policy to an interface gig 2 IP access group, and the name of the proxy, access control policy, which is a proxy, and in. Job done. If I open and go back to my ISP, which is holding, and let's try with the user. Close the browser, open it again. So right now, the user is going to access the destination where the proxy is configured explicitly, and the proxy will be sending the traffic to the default gateway. See, 1028, 1038. We can see that the traffic is coming from the IP 1111.150, and the users are using traffic as a proxy. Now, if in case a user is smart, try to remove the proxy, try to send the traffic without any proxy server, the traffic will never be allowed because access control policy on the default gateway will be there to stop it. I hope this session was informative, and the details for the proxy and the configuration can be found in the link in the references. I hope this session is informative for you, and I thank you for joining.